I saw it all, from my upper Hive spire, with magnoculars I received from my grandfather on reaching adulthood. I saw it all. I never thought I would use them. After all, what was there to see? When you look down on a hive all day, there really is no need to see beyond a certain level. Nothing worth the attention lower down. Practically nothing on the horizon as usual. But I located these magnoculars swiftly enough when I finally needed them. My sealed suite atop the heavens afforded me a ringside seat. I saw it all. How the ship landed outside the range of our fire, our guns. How its hatches opened, and a cloud of insects burst from its confines. I sat transfixed at the movement outside of the vessel. The larger vessel seemed to be a distraction, as the air was soon crisscrossed by fast attack craft. Their accuracy was unerring. They flew over the hive, firing missiles of melters and stripping away our hardpoints in quick succession. Soon they were burning and melting towers all over the outer walls of the hive. Alas, now I know that these acrobatics and pyrotechnics were the distraction themselves. It must have made the military believe that a conventional assault was in the offing. We ignored the insects, those things that had come from their ship. We did not see the real threat. After they had finished their dissection of our defences, they seemed to just wait. There was activity outside the vessel, but very slow, very calm. They were disembarking their armour and personnel carriers for the rest of the day, methodically, waiting. And by nightfall I knew why. The streets began to teem with people crying out for help, crying out in pain. All the while these little nasty insects had their feast on them. Pus ran from scars only hours old. Tears rent by their own hands as the agony of the infections made them go insane. Some lurched and fell, vomiting, and the streets ran with all forms of discharge as the night progressed. Some would collapse and then lay still, before bursting only minutes later, more of these flies entering the chain. Inside my sealed apartment I watched on in horror. As the moon rose in the air, it was as though the entire hive were wailing in pain, a maddening cacophony that I drowned out by use of a sound system. Music played loudly to remove the dirge. But on I watched. The walls fell in a few places after huge shudders across the city. How, I do not know, but the enemy had somehow set charges. The onward advance of the twisted space marines was almost languid. There was very little fire coming at them, as most of the Hive defense forces were in the same state as all others, dying of a plague so virulent and rapid none could believe it to be anything other than an act of some dark and terrible god. Yet those still able to stand on Fire Lasgan were gathered at the breaches. It made no difference. The Marines were disgusting to view, so I did not use my magnoculars to their apex performance specifications. A tad out of focus I may have been. I could still see the effects of the fire coming in. Parts will be blown off. Lasgun fire occasionally finding a supposed weak spot in the Astartes' armour, going straight through some bulge or sack outside its aegis. Yet nothing stopped these shambling horrors. Onwards they came, their guns spitting death at all who stood against them. The streets became a bloodbath. These Marines just rode over all who were there, crushing them under their tracks or just carving sways through them, all the while getting closer to not the Hive interior or command, but working their way to the air filtration centres. For the rest of the night and the next day I watched as the air changed hue. As I watched the moving in the balconies, spires, streets and market squares all fall silent. The wailing ended bit by bit as the air changed more. As the sun set, I saw some of these horrors, the Marines, then take to the streets. At first I did not understand what I was seeing, for the ground seemed to move, to writhe at their passing. It was minutes before realization dawned on me. It was not the ground. It was the dead. In the wake of the Marines, the dead were rising. Every last person in this hive below my level is now dead, a shambling zombie. But they won't get me. Oh no. I walk across the halls of my home to that other gift bequeathed me by my grandfather that I thought utterly pointless. In the first week I had it, I used to throw things into it just to see them combust. They won't get me. I press the control and see the cylinder's door open. I step inside. The door closes. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, and I wish to introduce you to the forces and factions of the Warhammer 40k universe. Today, we will be dealing with one of the most fearsome and repulsive units, or types of warriors, in the entire setting of the grim darkness of the future. Plague Marines. A Plague Marine is an Astartes, a space marine, who has turned his back on the Imperium and the light of the Emperor, and chosen to kneel at the feet of the dark god Nurgle, Lord of Decay. They are creatures of unfettered evil, and corrupt all that come into contact with them. But for the basics of the Plague Marines, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Plague Marines. Plague Marines are Chaos Space Marines who have sworn themselves to Nurgle, the Chaos God of pestilence and entropy. The first Plague Marines were warriors of the Death Guard Legion, trapped in the warp upon their spaceships when the virulent destroyer plague struck their fleet. Mortarion and his legion offered themselves up to the service of the Lord of Decay in return for their lives. Their bodies became bloated and swollen with the corruption festering within them, but they no longer felt the agony of the warpox and did not die from its horrific symptoms. Since then, many Space Marines have dedicated themselves to Nurgle, though few achieved the vaunted ranks of the Death Guard. Those who wish to join the most fetid of cadres must first swear loyalty to the Primarch Mortarion. Only then will Nurgle bestow upon them the corrupting ague that created the Plague Marines. Outside of the Death Guard, a favoured few sorcerers of Nurgle know the secrets of the Plague Marines, and Abaddon of the Black Legion has won many of these spellcasters to his cause. In return for fealty and long service, these blight mages will bestow their pestilent gifts in the War Master's name. Regardless of allegiance, all Plague Marines have disgusting, rotted bodies that stink of decay. The putrescent slime that oozes from their many weeping sores corrodes their armour and burns their skin. But despite their horrific disfigurements, the Plague Marines are fearsome warriors indeed. Their rotting brains are inured to the agony of bodily corruption, making them all but immune to the pain or debilitation caused by the weapons of the enemy. Not for nothing are these repugnant foot soldiers considered the most resilient of all the Chaos Space Marines. The Plague Marines prefer short-ranged firefights, where they can truly appreciate the festering carnage they inflict upon their enemies, even as they laugh off the bolters and las blasts directed back at them. The blessed reek of corruption, the sight of freshly suppurating flesh, and the blossoming gore of an infected wound, these are things to be grateful for. For those who do not appreciate Grandfather Nurgle's bounty are soon laid low. Should the enemy close to within arm's reach, the Plague Marines will attack with plague-riddled knives, and even hurl toxic blight grenades, vile inventions containing virulent toxins that eat away at armour and fill the air with thick clouds of blinding spores. The most ostentatious blight grenades are death's heads, made from the severed remains of fallen enemies, each cranium filled to the brim with a cocktail of disease before being sealed with ancient wax. As well as fighting at the behest of the Lords of Chaos, the Plague Marines dedicate their lives to spreading corruption and decay across the galaxy. The fleets of Nurgle that spew from the warp spread contagion and pestilence across dozens of star systems. Once the plague ships are abandoned or their crews finally destroyed, the hulks float back to the warp and eventually, perhaps guided by the hand of Nurgle himself, find their way to a plague planet, where they are recrewed for a new wave of attacks. The Cloud of Flies. During a plague ship's journey through the war, the interior of the craft erupts with large, furry black flies that fill its holds with their decaying carcasses. When the plague ship reaches a world, the plague marines disembark to make planetfall. As soon as their transport's hatches open, a thick cloud of insects is released, ready to spread its foulness across a virgin planet. The fly is sacred to Nurgle, for it feasts upon the rotten and the foul. Even one such beast can carry upon its little limbs a cornucopia of infections and viruses, spreading the gifts of contagion to everything blessed by the visitations. When they come on in a great swarm, these diminutive creatures can spread a plague with incredible speed, infecting, infesting, hatching and multiplying in celebration of Nurgle's bounteous cycle with each new day. The symbol of the fly is therefore common amongst the Plague Marines, with elements of its form echoed in the mutant bodies of the Death Guard, Nurgle's chosen sons. End quote. Now the Plague Marines are truly repulsive. Like an orc infestation, as soon as they make landfall on a planet, the end has already begun. Their rot, their diseases, their corruption spread by their ever-present entourage of flies, and by their mere presence alone. Khorne, Slaanesh, even unwittingly Tzeentch, all require the compliance of the local sentient race to truly take hold. One must be seduced by Slaanesh, must be submerged in bloodlust and hate for Khorne, or be willing to engage in the mind-bending games of Tzeentch for them to fully take a world. Not so with the blessings of the grandfather Nurgle. The mind may be too small for doubt, the will may verily be iron, but the flesh may yet be weak, and there is no resisting the gifts of the grandfather through pious supplication or adamantine faith alone. For to die may mean to be animated as a zombie, so even in death one joins the legions of Nurgle. If one does not die of the poxes, then one's fate may be the slow, excruciatingly painful transformation into a plague bearer. The only escape from the twisting into a plague bearer, or the eventual raising from the dead like a macabre puppet, is an aggressive and destructive suicide that leaves little of the body remaining to be animated. The Plague Marines themselves are a terror on the battlefield. They slowly march towards their adversaries, firing wet-sounding bolters and blight launchers as they lurch forward, grinding down their enemies while their fire that they receive merely bounces off, or worse, blows chunks of fetid carcass from them without any real effect. All the time these flesh splashes spread further pestilence and contagion. Any resisting the Plague Marines, Death Guard or no, often have the rudest of awakenings when they do close. For they are still Astartes, with Space Marine reflexes. A force finally engaged by the Marines will find them more than able to be as savage as any Khornite warband. But it is the utter erosion of morale that is one of the main powers of the Plague Marines. Other forces can be killed, can be injured, can be resisted with courage and skill alone. It is cleaner, purer. A berserker charges, a demonette cartwheels, a Tzeentch demon hovers into battle, all with the will of their god augmenting their speed, ferocity or subtlety. A battle ensues, a contest of strength, intelligence, skill and valour. But not so with the Plague Marines, for they send forth a debilitating miasma that only sealed suits prove any defence whatsoever. If you ask a man or woman to die by blade or bolter or flame, is one thing, but to ask them to sit huddled in a trench covered in buboes and simpering from the pain is another. Facing Plague Marines is often an inglorious end, no matter if victory is actually achieved or no. It is one of the least romantic ways to go in a galaxy where the warrior archetype is so lauded. Hence are the Plague Marines often the most damaging to the fighting spirit of any planet that they infest. Few wish to go out that way. And thus is the door to the grandfather opened within their very hearts and souls via the back door of their bodies. But we shall go into more details on that very soon, when I cover Grandfather Nurgle in his own entry. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to Plague Marines. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then please hit the notifications button. as I would not want you to miss out. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.